Now that it might have been a good idea to try and do something in Brooklyn so that we could film some stuff at the actual exhibition. Because, I mean, we could bring stuff, we could pull stuff up on the computers and have you edit it into the interview.
Yeah.
And I'm also asking artists to do that. So any
Can we edit our
ephemera.
own thing?
I knew that was going to come up. I don't know.
But we have clips that you can definitely use.
Yeah.
We have to think about it. Since these are going to be webisodes, we got to think about what we want to be public.
Right.
Well, I mean, you always just use the stuff that's already public. And just put that in there.
But it might be, I think it would be cool actually to film something in the museum, in the installation.
I think, okay. We can
I
figure out
guess the
how to
next
do
day
that.
we'd be able to do that would be Wednesday, right? Or Tuesday? They're closed Monday and Tuesday? Or
So Monday and Tuesday.
yes, the next day we'd be able to do that would be Wednesday.
So however you want to do it. I mean, we're just in the beginning of this, so
Okay.
I think that the organization just brought on an editor. I haven't met her yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to use the camera. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So it's like a process as it goes along.
Could be doing some reshoots.
Okay, cool. Well, so we can
Hopefully
bring up,
not,
and we
okay.
can.
Do we have to do
set
the
up
same
some-
thing during the reshoots?
No, I
For
love
continuity?
costume. I love costume shooting. That's one of my favorites.
So, the way this computer's set up now, Will, can we search on any of those hard drives to just pull up different clips or
I got the
excerpts?
clip hard drive.
Oh, okay, nice. So just plug that in. Maybe as we talk, we might want to bring up something as an example.
I need that.
Otherwise, I think we're in good shape.
So I think we can get started.
We can turn this thing off. Use that.
Okay.
It's bigger.
Just kind of exactly where we were getting ready to go in the conversation before I hit record on the camera. So just, introducing yourselves and saying what kind of work it is that you do.
And am I looking at you or am I looking at something else?
Look at me.
My name is Bayeté Ross Smith, and I am a photographer, multimedia, and mixed media visual artist. A lot of my work deals with identity, preconceived notions, perceptions, how human beings project their sense of self to other people in the world, and then how that's perceived by other people and how that affects human interactions. And I work in a variety of mediums, from sound to sculpture. I'm photo-based because I started my career as a photojournalism, video, film, etc.
And Will, do you even consider yourself an artist?
That's again the very subjective question. Since like,
Your
what
name.
is art?
Just give me
Okay.
the full name first.
Well, I'm Will Sylvester, and am I even in the frame? Can we go this way?
There's a line.
The lighting?
Yeah, you're in.
Alright, anyways. Will Sylvester. I am a documentarian, if you will. I do documentary films. I mostly edit video, do music, and now building installations for Question Bridge.
So how did you two come together to be working?
We're cousins.
Yeah, we family.
Born on the same day.
And so talk to me then about the relationship of the artist to audience.
Well, I think that it's interesting, the question of how the artist develops their relationship to the audience. At a certain point in time, art was a very elite thing, and so it was presented to the public in a sense that you needed to have a certain background or have studied or read certain things in order to engage in art, in order to get the most out of it. Now, through technology and just natural evolution of society, we're starting to realize that art is anything that's visual or performative or even sound that's creative that can engage your senses and captivate you and evoke a feeling. So for me as an artist, my goal is to make my work receptive or make my work be the type of thing that can be engaged with by a wide variety of different audiences, of economic classes, of different class backgrounds, and to be able to create work that can be incorporated into daily life as anything else becomes part of our daily life as, like human beings.
So how does one incorporate art into their daily life? Like by what means do you use to be able to generate something like this?
Well, I have a specific philosophy because I started as a photojournalist. So, you know, the way I work is I design projects to relate to common human experiences, and I design them to be easily read by someone and for them not to have a specific background other than, you know, just living in the society we live in. So a lot of my work is based on an American experience, but I try to make it as international as possible. So, you know, the work I did a project about gun owners and their guns, because I felt like violence is something, in general, is a theme we can all deal with and react to as part of life, but then I'm putting an artistic spin on it. With Question Bridge, it's looking at a demographic group that a lot of people feel as if it's one specific thing or they have a specific type of person in mind, and then kind of exploding that myth. And the methodology is really to make it visually compelling, but also make the language relatively simple, so to explore profound concepts through simple language.
So where would inviting or bringing in a documentarian come into that? Into your means of incorporating art into people's everyday lives? I mean, of course, for the technical knowledge, that's
Right.
understandable, but what about the visual language?
For me, it's important that there's a real element to all the work that I do, so that a part of it has to be real. And it's great to use artistic license, but the fact that part of it is real anchors it and makes it more relatable, beyond it just being something that I want to do. It gives it some sort of basis beyond me. I mean, Will can speak to his specific involvement in Question Bridge, but you know, because he's my cousin, I knew what he was up to. I knew what kind of work he was doing, and I felt working with Question Bridge was a great fit given his experience in film as a documentarian, and also his understanding of technology and how to integrate technology into film and visual art, and also audio art, because he's also a DJ. So I knew he knew how to incorporate different technologies into the arts to create a captivating effect for an audience.
So I'm thinking about a lot of things, but the first thing I'm thinking about is to hear from Will about you know, identifying as a documentarian, but then also becoming involved in this art project, and how that has shifted your approach to the work that you've done before.
Well,
If it has, if it hasn't.
I mean, it's sort of, my whole process initially was sort of to rethink documentary in general. Like, all the stuff that I've done has been shorts, but sort of not in the general sense of, the idea of documentary usually is this very stale, very boring, you know, format of, this is the African tribe of blah blah blah, you know. And I mean, I remember sitting in classes and just being like absolutely bored with most of the stuff I, you know, generally saw. I mean, there were some good ones, of course, you know, Roger and Me, and like other things where you had these really exciting, down, you know, crazy things, but for the most part, they were really boring. And so it was sort of trying to rethink how documentary was presented, and I think Question Bridge was sort of an example of, you know, this new way that we can present, you know, very valuable information in a fun and interactive and engaging way. You know, using, I guess, and this is sort of where I guess the word art becomes, you know, it's like, well, film as art, you know, this is what we're doing, you know. And then you could also see, you know, I guess art as film, you know, in that sense. So, I mean, Question Bridge really is sort of, for me, being able to take all of those things and just smash them into one, and then being able to present it, you know, the ways we've been able to present Question Bridge as an art installation and as a film, you know, have spoken to that, really.
So are those the innovations that you're speaking about when you are talking about how you can push documentary, you know, kind of beyond its limits? And
yeah, I mean, I think we're pushing documentary beyond its limits in several ways. You know, I think when people thought of documenting things as far as art goes, it was really, you know, about photography, you know, or maybe paintings and, you know, sort of things like that, where you took life and, you know, presented it in this sort of fine art, I guess, form. You know, that was documentary in that sense. But now, you know, we're able to take a film and build sort of the sculpture out of it, and, you know, make it an installation, make it something that people can walk into and engage with. And, you know, it's interesting to see people at Question Bridge because, you know, they walk in, they're fascinated, one by the faces on the screen and sort of this mosaic and, you know, sort of whatever they sort of experience at that moment when they walk in. But then, you know, they also start engaging in it as like a film, so then they sit there and they watch. You know, whereas like you go to a gallery, you see a photo, you kind of stand, you stare, and you're like, okay, I can kind of move on, you know, and go to the next thing and the next thing. It's interesting to be able to push it to that, you know, new way where you can actually sit and watch and then be fascinated by sort of what's going on around you.
Well, you bring up, I think, two things that I feel are always kind of an undercurrent when it comes to artistic practice, but especially artistic practice that wants to kind of get outside of itself, if you will. This notion of like art and real. You know, if it's art, can it be real? You know, if it's real, can it be art? I just want to hear from you two what you think about this conversation. I mean, do you find the work that you're doing in some way playing between these two realms? Or do you think that even making that distinction is necessary? And if it is necessary to make the distinction, for whom?
I think it can be necessary to make that distinction at times. I don't know if it's that important with the work that we're doing.
Why?
I think if you take, you know, someone who's like a figurative painter who paints really beautiful images that are based on photographs, that it is important to know that those paintings aren't real. In this particular case, I think that I'm just like, you have to like tell someone like stop playing with your kid in the hallway
in front of this door.
Just keep it.
No, just keep it going.
Some people just let their kids run wild. It's just like, dude, that's setting a bad example for these kids. Like they think they can do whatever they want. But in our case, I think, you know, it can be more productive to blur that line because there's a real element. However, we do have to take artistic license in terms of how you present that. And that's something we're always doing as photographers and filmmakers, even if we're working in a documentary standpoint, is we're deciding what's in the frame that's going to be included. So when I take a photo, you know, what's in the photograph is important, but also what I've chose to crop out is just as important.
Right.
So in that particular case, we're always kind of playing with that idea of like what actually constitutes reality. So I like there to be an element of realism in there, but it's also important to understand that my perspective, who I am as a person, is crafting that artistic experience for someone to engage with.
Will, do you have?
I think anytime you're, at least for me, anytime you're dealing with media in general, you always have to ask yourself, well, what's outside of that frame? Like whether it's television or it's photography, you know, film, like, you know, it's always a question of what's outside of the frame, you know, especially when you deal with like documentary, you know, you go places and you film things, and as a, you know, person who's been involved with works, it's like, you know, you behind the camera see what's going on around it, and you're interviewing people and you're talking about things, but the viewer only sees what we show them and what we've edited and what we've given them. And I guess that goes for sort of just any sort of medium, really. And I mean, I think there's definitely a sort of a responsibility that we have, especially with Question Bridge, to present as openly and as honestly as we can. And I think that's the only thing we can really say at the end of the day, is that we've tried to really openly and honestly portray these men to the best of our abilities, you know.
Accurately.
Right. You know, yeah.
And expose people to the broadest range of different types of men. So how do we expose people to the broadest range of different types of black men and portray those accurately and honestly?
Yeah.
Without allowing specific agendas either on the part of the subjects or our own subconscious biases to come through.
Yeah, I mean, it's very curious to me because when I hear you talk about media, there's so much manipulation that's involved. You talk about, you know, the decisions about what's in the frame and what's not in the frame. And so that's where I still, you know, wonder where the real is located, because I think that once you start to get into those areas of, you know, manipulation and editing and just the parameters that you have to create in order to make it something that's digestible for an audience, where then you start to locate those notions of real.
Well, in the case of Question Bridge, it relates to an overall philosophy I have as an artist, which is I put a lot of effort into not manipulating content and context. So, you know, like I was on a reality show, and when I watched the reality show that I was on, I could see that they were manipulating through editing what actually happened and the context it was in. So while someone might have actually said a certain in response to something else that happened, that was all misconstrued. What we've done with Question Bridge is what we've edited, we put a lot of thought into portraying it accurately to what we could see as the person's point being. And while we tried to highlight certain emotional things and certain things that were captivating and where their personality came through, we put a lot of effort into it staying true to what they were communicating and who they were. So regardless of how we expanded the presentation to be engaging, the core of what was in the heart of what was being expressed by the men, we put a lot of effort into keeping that genuine and putting it in the proper context in which they said it.
I think one of the greatest things about working on Question Bridge is that, and not like anything else I've worked on, is, you know, usually when you work on something for documentary purposes, it's probably an editor and a director, or an editor and a producer, you know, working on it. It's like usually two opinions, and then you maybe show a rough cut to somebody who will give their opinion, and you go back and edit it again. So this really was like editing by committee, you know. The idea of having, you know, myself, Bayeté, Chris, Hank, Rosa, you know, having all of these ideas and these people in the room, and what is the best way we can present this, sort of gave it at least, you know, a more real feel for me, you know, to be able to present the, you know, most accurate, like you said, you know, possible representation.
Well, you brought up a word, you said responsibility. And I feel like that, you know, we can all three agree that that word responsibility is very much embedded in Question Bridge for sure, but not only just in Question Bridge. I think that as, you know, your work as artists, as documentarians, I think you're both kind of the combination of the two in that regard. Just kind of is a sensibility that runs throughout how you approach your work. And so thinking about this word, social engagement, because I feel like it's a word that comes up a lot, especially now. There's all this talk about social practices and social engagement, and there's slippage between the terms, and, you know, there are books being written now. There are you know, this granting organization is trying to figure out how do you fund projects like this, and then there's curators who are trying to figure out, well, how do you curate these kind of projects? So it's like the institution or the system has to kind of now mold itself around the work that artists like yourselves are doing. So I want to kind of first hear from you what you feel is the sentimentality around social engagement or social practice, if you have a preference in the terms, if you think that these terms are problematic. And where responsibility comes in there, because I think that idea could be a major differentiate between how you define or try to put a label on what it is that you do?
I mean, I guess at least for me, my question is defining social engagement.
Right.
You know, is social engagement just the ability that, you know, for, let's say, someone who's, I mean, what's the question? Like, is, you know, not just elite, you know, everyone can engage in works of art now, you know what I mean? Is that what we're saying social engagement is?
I mean, I think of it as accessibility on a general level, for lack of a better term. So, you know, I mean, it brings up so many issues, because part of it is, okay, who's in control of the art and the media, the imagery that is used to affect public perception and opinions of people? And then as artists, when we create artwork, how do we want to interact with our audience? And do we want it to interact with them on a social level within the context of daily life, or do we take that traditional art approach that we all saw as kids, going to a museum and there's a painting or a sculpture or some image on the wall in the gallery space and you stand there and look at it? Can it engage with you beyond very specified, rigid parameters of interaction? So I think that's where the social engagement comes into play, because you can take any artwork, and when you put it within a certain scenario in a certain space, it engages more socially. I mean, if you were to take the Mona Lisa and put it in like
Times Square.
Yeah, then that's a different type of social engagement. Or to put it in, you know.
I would think that the Mona Lisa will function very similarly in Times Square as it does at the Louvre.
Well, I don't know. I think more people will see it in Times Square.
I think you'll get a completely different audience in Times Square.
The audience will be different.
Than you would get at the Louvre. Like,
I don't know. The Louvre is kind of like Times Square inside for art. It's the same kind of tourist in Times Square.
But the Louvre is specifically for art. Times Square is for a wide variety of things. That's where the social engagement comes into play. You go to a place like, let's say, take Times Square for example. You go to Times Square, you could be traveling through there on your way to somewhere else. You could be going there to eat. You could be going there to look at the sights.
Go to the Toys
You could want to just.
Or the Dave & Buster's.
You could be going there to shop. You could just happen to be in the area and you want to sit down somewhere that's kind of public and people watch. So, you know, it brings me back to something you mentioned earlier, which is, you know, to my efforts to make the work I do engage with people and have a social engagement, community engagement angle, kind of culminates in my efforts to make the imagery and the media I create be able to function in a variety of different circumstances. So can my work function online? Can my work function in public space, a variety of different public spaces? Can it function in the gallery? Can it function, you know, in a theater setting? Can it function in all these other different settings and still be effective? That's kind of how I look at it.
I think you're saying something very smart, especially if you start to think about social engagement in a way, because I feel like that's the word that we're gravitating towards here, rather than social practice as some form of conduit or passageway. Like there has to be this kind of transience that perhaps is a characteristic of a social engaged practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I look at it as an artist in the 21st century, your work should not be hard to gain access to. Like maybe the actual physical commodity of it is hard, because we still live in a culture where part of how you make your living is through commodities. But in terms of being able to experience it on some level, it should be accessible. So obviously I get a different experience online than I do in a movie theater, than I do in a gallery. But the fact that it's accessible online and it can be accessible in public creates a certain way in which it engages the general public.
Well, did you want to add anything to this idea? Social practice, social engagement?
Nah, I mean, I think Bayeté said it, sort of summed it up. But I mean, I think...
I'm not sure if I cut you off.
No. I mean, I truly agree. I mean, it's just the ability to sort of, especially because we do live in this world of like Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, you know, all these things that, you know, where art really can easily be very accessible to people. I mean, you know, you see something. I mean, for example, for Question Bridge, it's like you're able to see it at the museum, and then you're able to see clips online. And you're able to sort of interact with some of the questions on the website, and you're able to really go through this whole experience and be able to on different levels. So let's say you're not in New York or you're not in Oakland or something, you're able to be able to access the online material and watch clips and be able to see it so that you are able to experience what you can't. Whereas the Mona Lisa, I mean, you can see photos of it here and there, but I mean, a lot of people can't get. Where is it, Paris? I don't even know.
Yep.
Yeah, you can't get to Paris, and I mean, everybody says that's the experience, but I mean, I think being able to have sort of that same experience sometimes online or in some other form, being able to do those kinds of things and stuff.
And Will brings up a good point in that also, and I think this is what you're getting at. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there hasn't been the effort put into allowing people to have a more authentic experience of the Mona Lisa aside from just being in front of it.
Right.
So you're told about it, but there really hasn't been any effort to make experiencing it accessible. They just like, go to Paris if you really want to see it.
Right, I think that's sort of the social engagement that I think we're speaking about, is being able to have some sort of similar experience to a work of art, as you would have it, let's say, in the gallery or in the museum space. Being able to bring it to a community that wouldn't be able to experience otherwise, or bring it to a more broad community that, may be able to experience, but won't take the time to go experience it. I think that sort of that social engagement, maybe is what we're looking for here.
Well, it sounds like a few things. There's the question of access. There, in relation to that, there's then audience in relation to access, and then I also am thinking about presentation and venue.
Yeah, well, it's also understanding that when you make the work more accessible and use a variety of different ways of getting it to people on different platforms, getting it to people, that doesn't lessen the value of the work or the experience. That it's just a different type of experience. And with the way things are, every time, we have a variety of different opportunities to reach a person and connect with the audience member. And the question becomes, okay, what are your goals as an artist? Do you want to reach a lot of different people with an idea and have it affect them? Do you want to get rich? Do you want to just cater to a certain population? Like, what are your goals? For me, I feel like every opportunity I have to affect a person, regardless of how that may happen, is worthwhile. So if I can affect someone through Twitter, okay, maybe I'm only affecting them through Twitter. Of course, that's not the same and isn't the same level of experience as in a museum or a gallery or a public art installation. But I think it still holds some value.
Right. Well, here's the thing. You just said the buzzword, I think, that underlies all of this is about notions of value. I don't even think we would even be having this conversation if that wasn't the word or the concept that's really being challenged right now, especially in relation to art making and image generation, right? So I'm thinking about the question of value, how value gets reshaped by the way in which an audience is related to a project. And we have been using the example of Mona Lisa, and there's kind of very passive consumer type of receptivity that happens when you're looking at images, which I think that most people experience anytime they look at an image. It's just based on the consumption of the image. You don't have to actually put anything back out once you've consumed the image. But I feel like social engagement, and you can let me know if this is not the direction that it's going for you, it demands something else of the audience. It's not just about the audience kind of happening upon a work of art, but it is asking of its audience to be active in a way, in some way implied in the creation of the work of art, depending on where you want to locate the art, right? And then in that, in that kind of connectivity and the way that the audience is involved has so much to do with then where you place the value, you know, whether it be on the work, whether it be in terms of how you get funding, whether it be in terms of the next exhibition that you get. And I think that that's where this type of practice is really challenging to the institution or organizations as a whole, because that notion of value is so completely subverted.
It kind of becomes, I mean, off the top of my head, it kind of becomes this in-between thing where it's not, you know, super commodified like how the music industry is, where you're just selling people songs and then licensing the use of those songs. So there's a clear product that can be mass distributed.
Right.
It's art, so it can't, you're not mass distributing it per se, but at the same time, you're attempting to take it out of that elite spectrum, so you're trying to get the masses to be able to engage in it, and you're kind of falling in between those two traditional approaches to determining value for something that's considered creative.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that it opens up in some way a new economy of some kind, because it does, you know, kind of replace our traditional notions of where value is, because there isn't necessarily a thing that comes out of it. I mean, it can kind of crop up in all these different forms that you and Will have been talking about. So it's not really like one thing. It's this sort of multiplicity or multivocality of things. So then where, you know, like, where do you locate it? You know, what is its importance and what is its value? You know, and how much, I guess the question I'm trying to find out, how much of that is determined by the relationship you establish with your audience?
I think it's a person-to-person sort of thing sometimes. Like, I mean, I guess that's sort of maybe the value of art in general. It's really personal. So, I mean, you know, for one person, it may be, you know, very valuable in that sense. But then to another person, it may not be. But I think the ability to engage people on different levels sort of extends that value to where maybe someone might feel it differently on one level, on maybe in one presentation, but may feel differently by another. I think interesting, like this sort of idea of value keeps in my head like rolling around, like street art, like graffiti, like that sort of thing sort of pops up where, you know, on the street, you know, you have one level of value where, you know, cats who, you know, live in hoods and stuff like that, but you feel like you see it every day. Like, I mean, I live, you know, in Brooklyn now, and like I see all this graffiti on the walls and everything, and I ride on the train, I see it, I'm like trying to catch people and things, like I'm trying to really see it, whereas someone, you know, who isn't me may not see it as the same thing, you know, may not value it as the same thing. But interestingly enough, nowadays, you know, we have these graffiti artists and galleries, you know, where the value for me changes. I'm like, I don't really want to see a gallery piece of some graffiti. I really want to see it on walls. I want to see it on sides of trucks. Like, that's for me. But for some other people, that's where the value for them it lies, you know. They want to see it in the gallery. They want to see these big canvas pieces, or they want to see it on a big white wall in the middle of a museum somewhere. Like, that's where the value lies for them. So. Yeah,
I mean, once it's the gallery, it's no longer graffiti. It's, you know, the medium just becomes spray paint.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's it.
But I mean,
now you work in spray paint on canvas.
On canvas.
But here's the thing. Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing. It's like, imagine if someone, you know, paints with oils on a wall outside. Like, I mean, you know,
it's a mural.
It's
no longer a, you know,
no longer street art.
It's no longer a painting.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so it's just sort of like what medium is where your value lies. I mean, is that what I'm saying?
Well, to me, it's like you're talking about more about the experience.
It's sort of the experience of the whole thing. It's where you go.
And not to only think in terms of, you know, dichotomies or in the binary, but it's like when we were talking earlier about the creative process, you know, compared to art, they're not necessarily one and the same thing. You know, they're not mutually exclusive entities. You know, it's like graffiti you appreciate or you indulge in for the creative process of it, that kind of impulse and necessity to be creative, and also to, you know, be a renegade, you know, have that kind of, you know, I'm breaking the law, but at the same time I'm breaking the law by means of doing something that I consider to be beautiful in breaking the law and undermining the status quo, right? But then art is the commodity. You know, when I think about art, I think about commodification. You know, not to necessarily say that graffiti isn't art, because I think that it can be, but art. Now I'm confusing myself in this, but that's kind of where I make those distinctions, and I think that when you use terms like social engagement, you're getting more along those lines of creative process. Doesn't necessarily have to necessitate art, and I think that that word then becomes something that is a problematic within this framework.
I would say it all draws back to the question of what is art.
Well, I mean, there's two types of value that we're getting at here. One is social and cultural value, just in general. Like, what is the value of creating things that have some sort of impact on people that resonate with them, that affect their thinking and the way they see the world. And then the second is...
Battery dead. Hold on to that.
I was about to be deep. Straight up like playing the sheep stuff.
Boom. We're rolling. Okay.
Use the flip cameras from now on.
So...
That sounds a bit easier for what she's doing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Like, that'd be way easier.
Well...
Yeah. I mean, that's the one they gave her. So
yeah, that's true.
You know, we have to...
But yeah, flips are, I mean, they're designed to be like super easy for just, you just need to record something,
right.
Boom.
Just
and it's
turn it
actually good enough quality that you could edit it into something high def theoretically and not like completely lose quality. Yeah.
I heard they're not selling flips anymore.
Well, because, you know, the quality on your phone, on the video cameras in your phone are getting better and better and better. So you don't necessarily need that market as much anymore. Because you can also shoot video with your digital SLR, so that in-between market is starting to close. Yeah.
I see.
I like having flips around, though. It's always cool to have a couple as a backup when something goes down. You're just like, oh, let me pop some double A's in here.
I mean, some of us don't have iPhone 4s, you know?
Yeah.
Still just like, ha!
But also, like, as a backup, if some of your other stuff fails, you're just like, oh.
Well, I mean, you know what I like about having flip cameras? Is the fact that you can actually just, like, take the camera and load all the stuff onto the camera and not have to load stuff onto your phone.
Well, that's true, and you can actually theoretically use them as like hard drives.
Yes.
Yes. Store
very
You
true.
two sound like nerds. Please.
You should have seen me the other day when I saw that guy with the 18% gray shirt on.
18% gray? That was written on his shirt, or that was like
yeah,
the
it was
saturation?
actually 18% gray too.
Oh my god.
And I was like, 18%
I was such a
nerd.
So, getting back to the heavy stuff.
Okay,
You were talking about two forms
of value. Right. Yeah, so when we start to try and determine, like, okay, how do you figure out the value of art when it takes these various forms or various avenues of presentation to the public? I think there's these two types of value that we're working to determine. One is its social and cultural value, how it affects people and, you know, helps them grow and changes the way they think and the way they interact with other people and the way they interact with the world. And then you have another form of value, which is the actual industrial value or the commodity value, which is what's its value in a marketplace. And one of the things I think we've struggled with, especially in the United States, is how we can apply value to something where there's not a clear market value for it. We tend to struggle with that. And I think, you know, we definitely have to figure out some new solutions to that issue. But part of the problem is that when you think of something as art, if it doesn't exist in those traditional art marketplaces, its value, a lot of times its value is decreased. But what becomes interesting is, you know, you could take anything, and once you put it in a fine art situation, then all of a sudden it has art market value. So, you know, I could take this flip camera and like paint it gold, and put it in a frame, and now it's art, and that completely changes the value. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's also part of the, I feel like the cynicism of contemporary art too, in relation to like what is ready-made, for lack of a better term, or mass-produced. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then kind of removing that mass-produced item and putting it into the fine art, the fine specimen context.
Yeah, or if you take, finger paintings by kids and like collage them together, then say it's abstract.
Right, that kind of thing. But I also want to know, like, in relation to this kind of work, if the audience is supposed to give something back.
Oh, right.
Like, are they required to?
Not necessarily a requirement, but that you're kind of, you're asking something of your audience, or their participation is implied.
Well, we kind of hope there's some sort of clear response to the work that exists outside of just being a viewer of it.
Well, how would you measure a response?
Well, it's hard to measure. I mean, a lot of it is based on feedback. It's hard to measure over the short term.
I mean, but isn't that sort of, I guess, the goal of anybody sort of doing work in general is to get some sort of feedback, some sort of response?
I mean, you would think, but you can't necessarily take that for granted. Some people just want to sell paintings.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm still going off of our Mona Lisa example. It's like the audience is not required to get anything back in relation to that work of art. That work exists, as an entity unto itself, emanating something from itself to the audience, and the audience comes, behold, and then they leave, they buy a mug, they leave, But Question Bridge does something else,
Well, I think maybe that just might be reflective of maybe who we are as, artists, in the sense that, I think what drives all of us in the whole group is that, we want that feedback.
And is that then part of the artistic process?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to what we're talking about as documentarians and visual artists and doing things that have social significance. We're working on crafting things in a way so that it elicits a certain emotional response, but a response that there's then something that person can do within their life that directly relates to that response. So instead of it being something that's like kind of like theoretical, like, I have a different idea of what romanticism means or something. When you look at a project like Question Bridge, if it changes your perception of black men or gets you to think about a topic or an issue from a viewpoint you didn't think about it before, then that's the interaction, that's the engagement, and then hopefully down the line, at an appropriate time in life, that understanding allows you to take some sort of action that's meaningful. But that's hard to measure.
I think at least for me, I think if anything, sort of the idea for us is sort of discussion. Really, the bottom line really is to just, if anything we have done is for someone to, whether it's talking to themselves or talking to the person next to them, is just, start some sort of discussion. Whether positive, negative, whatever it may be, that the work at least starts a discussion.
And also issues of familiarity, so to make, black males to develop familiarity with mainstream America and the mainstream general world with black males, so that people feel like they have familiarity with black males, so they will then feel like they can understand black men easier, and they're not so, mystical and mystified as like these creatures, that they actually feel some familiarity with them as people.
I think, bringing up the idea of mythology is a really good one, because I also wonder about the individual, like kind of where the whole notion of the individual in that relationship to a work of art, or the individual as the artist or the art maker, the individual as producer. If there's something with having social responsibility as a part of what drives you to create, in some way negates the mythology of the individual that is so much built up within the realm in which we're used to making our living, at least right now as we speak. And I ask that because I think that if you give me the generosity in saying, okay, yeah, you know, that we are thinking about a new kind of economic system here when you start to rethink notions of value as that relates to what you demand or what kind of response you want to elicit from your audience. And then do we now have to rethink the position of the individual? Because it seems like what you're saying in terms of just the editing process, it's not just you and some other person. There's like 8 people. You sit down and now you've got to somehow synthesize 8 different points of view, and you're synthesizing however many hundreds of hours of video into this kind of, you know, smaller unit of things. What happens to the individual now in this kind of...
As an artist or the audience member?
Just that idea of the individual, because it seems like there's not now only one maker, there's not only one editor, and in that, I think, in creating that kind of cacophony, right, just in terms of embracing it as a part of how you present the project, that then is a reflection of the type of diversity you want to get from your audience, or that you're anticipating you'll get from your audience. And so you bring that into your process because you know you want to be talking to however many people that you can, you know, wherever you want to put, you know, the word mass, however, you know, whatever your mass number would be.
Well, one of my philosophies is that when I'm creating something, I'm creating a certain context and giving people a view of a certain story, but the story is open-ended, the idea is open-ended, so that even though we're dealing in a certain realm of ideas, whether it's like Our Kind of People, which is about identity, ethnicity, gender, and fashion, or if it's Got the Power, where you're hearing soundtracks that are made by a community and their memories of that space, that there's a certain element of it that the individual then has the freedom to complete the story or the experience. So it becomes open to a broad range of people because it's accessible, but then each individual person is the one who actually closes the loop, if you will. They take their own personal experience that they bring to it, and that's what completes the experience. So it's not complete, in my opinion, until you as an individual person, you know, put your individual reflection to how you receive it.
But it's that kind of individuality in relation to another individual. There seems to be this kind of like transference that continues to happen from person to person, so that, you know, because, you know, the idea keeps transferring from person to person, that now all of a sudden you've created this community or network of individuals through this process.
Well, I don't know if I'm sure, maybe I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at. I mean, when I think about, take Question Bridge for example, different people get different things from it, and we've talked to dozens, if not hundreds of people, and we've gotten their responses to what they've seen. You know, I just finished up presentations for a class I taught on Question Bridge at the International Center of Photography, and I bring that up because one of the teenagers in my class, and just for the sake of understanding context, who happens to be 16, female, Jewish, and white, and I mean white in the sense that, like, in America, she would be perceived as white as opposed to being perceived as something else.
Right.
And then also Jewish.
Right.
In addition to that. But anyway, after she watched a certain sequence of Question Bridge, one of her comments was that, you know, she had never thought about selling drugs as seeming like a viable career choice. She had always thought of it as something that someone does as a last resort. But she had never thought about the fact that to a certain type of person, that could seem like a practical approach to a career, even though it's illegal. Now, someone else might not get that from it. Yeah, that's the first time I've heard someone have that particular response. But that's her own individual stamp that Question Bridge had on her. While other people saw that same sequence and didn't have that response to what they interacted with. So I think that's part of where, you know, the social engagement becomes individual.
Right. But I'm also, and I'm not trying to lead you in any particular way, but I'm curious to know how the individual functions in Question Bridge.
Well, I mean, the subjects are all empowered to speak their truth on what are close as possible to their terms. So, I mean, although in some cases we've had people who've ranted for a long time, and we've had to really be like, okay, how do we chop that up? And that goes back to the social responsibility, because we're like, okay, this dude just ranted for 5 minutes or longer. How do we chop this up but still stay true to what he was talking about when he went on and on and on and on?
Right.
So there's that individual there, and then part of what's important is each of us on the team brings our own individual perspective. And so the idea that you can't make art by committee is kind of bullshit, because you need those alternative perspectives, those various perspectives, to balance each other out. So it doesn't become too much of Bayeté's perspective. My perspective is balanced out by Will's perspective, which is balanced out by Rose's perspective, which is balanced out by Hank's perspective or Chris's perspective, so that we keep all those different elements are always in there and equally represented. And sure, sometimes when we're working with a certain sequence, Hank's perspective is the most relevant to what that's actually about, and then we're catering more to his perspective there. Or Will's perspective is more relevant in this situation. But the idea is that overall it's balanced from a creative aspect.
I think that's sort of the thing about working on Question Bridge, is that it really is, I mean, it's sort of balanced from that standpoint, but it's also balanced on, you know, when we were trying to figure out which things to bring into it, you know, we were trying to, you know, try to bring in as many, I guess, voices as possible.
Right.
You know, so that you just didn't get one perspective from this one individual. You got multiple perspectives from multiple individuals. And, I mean, at times, some of them sort of, you know, were very similar, but they were all uniquely different.
There are different types of individuals, so different types of voices.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that sort of then speaks to whoever's watching it, is that you sort of get this multi-faceted, you know, sort of view, and it's not just, you know, black men are this way. You know, you now have to let yourself sort of be open to, and I mean, maybe you don't, but you know, you sort of get the view that they have these multi thoughts, and some of them may be similar, you know, some of them may be, you know, they may be different, but they're unique to each person. You know, they're unique to each one of them, and I think that's what we were trying to really do, and that people are unique in that sense. Like, as an audience, as personally as an audience member, every time I watch Question Bridge, I always find something new. Like, I mean, you know, I've had to watch 3 hours so many times, but I mean, you know, I was just in England, and I'm sitting in this room rewatching Question Bridge, because I have to watch it every time we install it. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching it, and I'm finding these things, just pulling things out of this that I just didn't really realize before. And, you know, it's interesting, and it's a different experience, and I think sometimes every time I watch, like, I really think that I do watch it, and I sort of change my perspective because of it. So.
It's something really compelling to me in, you know, just thinking about this project in particular, about the relationship between the individual and the collective. And I think that the work that you're doing really brings that to light, you know, not just thinking about it in an art context, but thinking about it just kind of in a social context overall. And if we are living in a time where that relationship, the relationship between the individual and the collective, is being reformed. And so what we've known prior to now from our parents' generation and the parents before them, and these ideas of the self-made individual, right, or the notions of private property or notions of ownership, or how we come to assign value based on material things or things that we own or have, that now we're living in a time, because of just the limitations of capitalism and limitations of democracy, we finally have to confront that perhaps this notion between the individual and the collective needs to be re-examined.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's interesting, at least for me. I don't know about Bayeté, but I know for me, you know, like our parents were like in the 60s. They were very collective, working people, and very, you know, they were all about that, and sort of how, you know, we grew up. We were basically brought up in a collective household. You know, both of our parents working together to raise us. You know, I mean, even after like we sort of separated, you know, we all ended up back in the same place in the end anyways, you know? And it's sort of, that idea, I think, has sort of, at least in me, sort of just been instilled that, like, you know, that's sort of how things get done, you know? Things get done collectively, you know? I mean, historically, things have gotten done collectively, and, I mean, you know, things can get done singularly, but, you know, people don't feel a part of it. People don't, you know, feel very left out, you know, and being able to do things collectively. I think one of the best things I think we've done with Question Bridge is reached out with social media and being able to bring people in, you know, that way. Let them know what's going on instead of being very, you know, exclusive by just, you know, putting in, you know, in a museum and saying, all right, great, we're done, you know. Is being able to, you know, go online and tell people, hey, you know, we got a showing here, we're doing this there, we're going here, you know, being able to bring people into that conversation, you know, who otherwise may not be available to be, you know, part of that. And then also with the curriculum and bringing in, you know, a younger base, but even an older base, like the teachers and the educators who are able to be a part of this process now, you know, and then being able to reach, you know, instead of just, you know, people of color, but, you know, people, you know, black people, or, you know, now you're able to reach, you know, Latinos and, you know, Caucasian, white, whatever you want to call them, you know, you know, but, right, yeah, I mean, but what's so interesting, though, I think, is, I mean, like, just getting back to England, like, how they took it is completely different than I've ever had to been able to just, like, from, you know, just being in America. So, I mean, they have a whole perspective, and so that's, like, the new open thing is that, you know, just showing it to an international audience is a completely new game for us.
So it's part of the social engagement aspect of it, is being willing and able to engage with people on their terms and interact with them on their terms. So it's not just like, okay, we set these terms, either you get it or you don't, or either you're worthy or you're not. It's like we're willing to have the project connect with people on their terms.
Well, this is, I think, the point that I want to end on, and it relates to, Will, you know, you brought up the whole social media thing, and a large portion of this process being publicly accountable has to do with our opening it up on the blog, you know, through social media platforms, so that we can then generate some form of public discourse, right, that will then lend itself to the granting process. Oh, it doesn't say that. But we're at the last question anyway, which put my verboseness aside. I'm curious to know from you how you think that sharing and generosity function as a part of this process.
Well, I mean, part of it is, you know, being willing to interact with people on their terms, as I said before. And also to think beyond oneself in terms of how you're creating and communicating ideas, and working to do that in a way that relates to other people. So it's not all about me, it's not all about Will, it's about how these ideas can be communicated and then thought about and then built upon. So, you know, you're opening your creative process to being influenced by a lot of other voices, a lot of other aspects, and then you're willing to have that discussion on and engage with those ideas on a wider variety of platforms and in different ways. And I think that's very generous because you're also approaching it with a sense of social responsibility. So you're being generous with your time and your energy and the way you're approaching crafting your work because you're feeling a certain sense of accountability.
Well,
I mean, just to sort of go off of that, I mean, in this case, for us, the social engagement was being able to, engage as many people as possible with this work. So how do we do that? And it's sort of looking at the ways and the platforms in which we can do that, and what is accessible for us to use. I think if you're talking social engagement in general, that sort of then becomes the question of who are you trying to reach? How many people are you trying to reach? What's your audience, whatever, and how do they relate? I think someone pointed out to me recently, like, they sort of thought Question Bridge as like a gaming platform. I mean, that as something that people can engage with, the Question Bridge game, as another platform for people to engage with. And then that's sort of how people engage with things these days, is on, social media, television, and games. Like, that's really how you can sort of engage a wide net of people. So it's sort of the question of who, how are you trying to reach people and what you're trying to reach them with, I guess.
so then how then is the people, as you say, how are they generous with you?
Well, that's hard to say because we're not them. But
Yeah.
How have you
I would
felt? How have you
estimate-
felt people's generosity towards you through this process, or through the process of social engagement overall?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, in terms of the subjects, they're very generous with their thoughts, ideas, time, and just with who they were as people. And then a lot of the audience has been generous in terms of the amount of time they spent in the exhibit, the feedback they've given us, because those are things that you don't have to do, and then telling other people about the project in a very basic way. I mean, and then there's also types of generosity that extend to, like more intellectual generosity where people are affected by something they experience in Question Bridge, and then they put the effort into changing their behavior, maybe in really, really small ways, but it changes the way that they act in the world on some small level. And the process of thinking about that and making it a point to change the way you approach the world is very generous.
I mean, I think for me, the generosity comes when I could say personally, when I walk into the exhibit and I see a bunch of people sitting there and they start talking about it, and they're in conversation, and I think that is sort of, that generosity that, I personally feel like I was trying to, elicit, I guess.
Yes.
When people are talking and they're in this discussion and they go out, they tell their friends, and then they're in discussion, and then, it hits the social networks, and it sort of just gets bigger and bigger, and it casts a wider net, I think, is that sort of thing. But I think, as far as giving and taking, it's sort of, I think it goes back to like what people really sort of get and want to give out of it, It comes down to the sort of the individuality, and I think we've been fortunate enough that people they walk in a Question Bridge, and when they walk out, they want to be able to tell people and talk about it. And so that's their process of giving.
Yeah, it makes them want to do something.
Right.
Afterwards.
Whatever it may be, yeah.
I think that's a great place to end.